I came into contact with an Aboriginal myth. So for background, I live in Australia and work a cleaning shift at a school that starts at about 4 a.m. I often listen to music while I work. One morning, I was singing along to my music while I scrubbed toilets. These particular toilets led directly outside, and the area I work has no foot traffic, so I hear and see no one until about 7 a.m. During a song, I hit a high note, and suddenly my music cut out. I tried to open Spotify back up, but it wouldn't open. I kept working until I heard a whistle from outside. I thought it might be my supervisor, so I went out to talk to him, but he wasn't there. I violently recalled that in Aboriginal myths, there is a creature that will kill you if you whistle at night. I dismissed the thought, but 10 minutes later I heard the whistle again, but it sounded closer, almost echoing off the walls of the toilets. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it louder, and I was terrified. I called out asking politely, "If I don't work with you, please leave me alone and in peace." A second later, I heard the whistle again, but it wasn't as loud. Then I heard it again, but further away. After about 10 minutes, I thought it was safe to leave the toilets, and although I was still uncomfortable, I didn't feel my life was in danger. I haven't encountered it since, but now I don't sing until I see the sunlight. When I was a teenager, I went through a rebellious phase. I was all dyed hair, spiky, torn clothes. To me, being weird was cool. Now, I'm a married man with a baby on the way. I have a promotion on the cards at work, life insurance, and a mortgage. My wife said she was happy to stay in the apartment we rented. I wanted somewhere that we owned, somewhere with a garden, somewhere with nice neighbors, a forever family home. It was Saturday afternoon, and I had just finished painting the nursery. I was cleaning the brushes when I noticed my wife standing in the doorway. She was supporting her by now always aching back with her hands, and she looked tired. Still beautiful, always beautiful, but run down. It had not been an easy pregnancy for her. "Do you know any knights in shining armor who will go down to the store and buy a damsel in distress a big tub of chocolate ice cream?" she asked, a smile brightening her face. I put my jacket on and headed straight off to the store. There were many factors which made me want to buy at this particular store. Our house was one of 24 on a small estate built only 5 years ago. On a day like the one I was going to the store to buy ice cream, it was easy to imagine I was living in a better, more innocent age. Lawns were being mowed, children played tag, clothes were being hung out to dry on lines that fluttered gently in a midsummer breeze, and I was walking to my local corner store. Until I moved here, I had always driven to big discount stores and bought in bulk. Shopping was a chore. I could not carry a tune, so I kept it quiet when I started whistling as I walked down the street. This was how life should be, I thought. The houses had all been built by the same developer, so it looked very similar. I enjoyed looking at the colorful flower displays and hanging baskets, lawn borders, and house nameplates, which owners used to personalize their properties. 10 minutes walk down the street from my house, I noticed for the first time that one place seemed to be lacking in a little bit of TLC. The grass on the lawn was patchy, and there were cracks in the paint on the front window pane. A shame, I thought, but tried not to be judgmental. Perhaps whoever lived there could not get out to tend their garden and property's exterior as they would have wished. My guesswork seemed to be confirmed when through the front window I noticed there was an old lady inside. I had not seen her standing there a moment before. She must have just walked into view. She had gray hair pulled into a bun. There were the lines of a lifelong livid etched into her skin. Old age, I pondered, comes to us all one day, and carried on my way. At the store, while I was carrying the ice cream for my wife to the till, I had an inspiration. There were pots with flowers in them for sale on a display near the counter. Money was very tight. Budgeting for a newborn in the house had left me close to being overextended. Although I had not admitted this to my wife because I did not want to add to her stress levels, if I did not get this promotion and the raise that came with it, finance was going to become a problem. Nonetheless, I decided I could treat the old lady on my street to some flowers. They did not even need to be transferred from the pot and could brighten up the front of her house by being placed next to the door. This was the kind of thing a neighbor did in the life I was making for myself. I was feeling good as I made my way back. I reached the old lady's house and was about to knock on the door when I noticed a man standing in the drive of the house opposite. He looked to be in his 50s and was what I would call a weather-worn person. He was close to bald and had quite a paunch look to him. "Help you?" he asked. but in a tone that suggested this was the last thing he wanted to do. My good mood deflated slightly by what was clearly a suspicious neighbor, bordering on a busybody. I fixed a smile into my face and replied, "Afternoon. I'm just dropping off these flowers for the elderly lady that lives here. I thought that would brighten up her porch and her day." He scowled. "Ain't no one lives in that house," he said. But I started to protest. He cut me off. "No one lives in that house, so I would thank you to be on your way." I had more than enough pressure points in my life, and I did not want to add more by rowing with one of my neighbors, even if they were being a jerk, so I went on my way. I left the plant pot against the post of the mailbox in my front garden. I would have to decide what to do with it later, and went inside. My wife was delighted at the ice cream, and her kiss made me forget about the unpleasantness of what had just occurred. The next day, through my thoughts, returned to the old lady. Having a weird neighbor who denied she was even living there, on top of her being housebound, must make life very difficult, if that was the case. I decided to try and find out. What did we do before the internet? I powered up my laptop and typed in the number of the property where I'd seen the old lady. Nothing specific about the house came up, but I did find a couple of articles on a local news site about the estate opening. In one, there was a photograph of a young couple being handed an oversized key by some bigwig from the developers. I followed a link to a story dated a year earlier, which showed a whole group of bigwigs gathered around a shovel for the breaking-in ceremony that preceded the start of the estate's construction. Then my eye was drawn to a new link at the bottom of the page. It read, "Tragic End to Couple's Tale." Feeling apprehensive, but hooked, I clicked on the story. I read it twice, then went to pour myself a bourbon. The article read, "A local couple's lives ended in tragedy last week, in what police are describing as a murder-suicide. Their bodies were found at the home they shared for over 60 years. The couple, aged 82 and 79, are believed to have been in dispute over the construction of a new housing estate. Their farmhouse stood on land earmarked for the estate, and the couple had refused a number of bids to buy their property. Both bodies were found with fatal shotgun wounds to the head. It is understood that after shooting his wife, the husband turned the gun on himself. It was not the brutal sadness of what was reported that got to me, or that my dream neighborhood was tainted. It was a picture of the couple published within the story. I had seen the old woman in the photograph, the day before, through the front window of the house, which was impossible. Of course it was. "Penny for your thoughts?" my wife asked. I had not seen her come into the room. I closed the page on my browser. I took her hand in mine. "Just grateful for everything I have," I told her. I am not a cold person, not selfish, but I have responsibilities now, priorities. The thought of what had happened to the elderly couple I had just read about was heartbreaking, but I could not dwell on it. My wife hugged me and whispered, "Ice cream," in my ear. Although I was determined not to be dragged off course, the estate seemed to have lost its sparkle as I walked to the store. I noticed a crumpled up beer can on the ground next to a litter bin, graffiti on a fence. When I reached the house where I had seen the old lady, I thought of the plant pot still on my front lawn, decided it'd be simpler if I kept it. There was no sign of the old lady or her neighbor, and I kept walking. I don't know why I glanced back, but I did, and I saw her. She was there, standing in her window as before. A coldness gripped me. She did look exactly like the old woman in the photograph. I stared at her. I couldn't help myself. She returned my gaze, and now I saw the gaping hole in her face, the blood, the shattered bones. Only one of her eyes remained. I turned and hurried down the street. Fear followed me every step of the way. I've lived in this town all my life. I know all the weird traditions that come with living in a place as remote as mine, but nothing explains what happens at our deer park. I used to come out here most evenings during the pandemic, park up by the base of the hill overlooking the sanctuary, and just immerse myself in nature. I was always mindful of the distance I had to keep from the deer, particularly during the mating season, and it wasn't like the deer didn't know what a car was. These were in their own reserve, sure, but the trail cut right through their vast fields, and they had grown accustomed to seeing cars all manner of times in the day and evening, which was what makes the situation all more unsettling. Starting last week, a sign was put up on the entrance gate to the park, impossible to miss as the car slowed and the tires rolled over the metal grates, With it being the late hours and very few cars on the road, I decided to stop and read it in full. It said, "A polite notice to our valued visitors entering the Oboro Nature Reserve. Our deer are exhibiting unusual behaviors, and we are politely requesting you observe the following guidelines in place as to best protect yourself and the well-being of our deer. Rule number 1. While the park is open 24 hours a day, we are recommending visitors do not stop their cars during observable grazing periods and on midsummer nights. You are welcome to drive through and observe from a distance, but please do not slow down or stop. Rule number 2. Should you be slowed or stopped at any other time, and the deer be curious by your vehicle, act calmly and do not speed up. Let them inspect you and judge you as a safe passerby. If they begin snorting, that is your cue to leave. There have been reports of deer standing on their hind legs and remaining idle in the fields. These rumors are a fallacy. Please do not pay attention to them. Rule 4. There is a black stag that holds dominion over the western herd. His antlers are sharp and his stride is impressive, but do not attempt to approach him. Please pay him the respect you would normally. Do not stare at any of the females in his harem. He will charge you. Bucks are not friendly. Rule number 5. Deer remember faces. They can recognize you from a distance and will verify your smell as you get closer. Listen intently the entire time. There are many of them and only one of you. You will do well to mind that. Rule number 6. Lastly, no matter what salacious rumors have been propagating amongst the community, the deer are not congregating in the dead of night. Deer are social animals that sleep and graze together in a herd. This is normal. The deer are acting normally. Drive safely, keep your doors locked, and have a lovely drive in the Oboro Nature Reserve. Strange, right? The notice wasn't your usual steel sign with carefully embossed wording. Rather, it had been hastily marked up and nailed to the wall adjacent to the welcome sign, as if in a hurry. I'd not heard any sorts of rumors around town, and nobody had complained about the deer park. We're a population of maybe 2,000, so it's not hard for word to get about. Still, I had my routine and intended to stick to it. Some of the info was valuable for newcomers. There was indeed a large black buck who paraded the western herd. His name was Jojo, and I fully believed he would gore anyone who outstayed their welcome or got too close. A beautiful specimen of muscle and authority. He ensured his harem never strayed too far, and seemed to be borderline obsessive about making sure they never went across to the eastern side where the large swathes of trees sat. In fact, I'd observed him on a couple of occasions actively nudging or ramming younger males away from the split in the road and back to safety. On the rare occasion that a member of the herd crossed the line, he would refuse to acknowledge them and actively keep them away from entering, as if they were banished. As I drove through the archway, I realized I'd not seen many deer in the eastern section of the park, looking out my window and staring at the makeshift forest to my right, and a burning question coming to the forefront of my mind that didn't leave as I reached the hill overlooking both sides of the hill. Where are the rest of the deer? It was unnerving to sit there and try to enact with my ritual of riding under the clear night when there was a strict absence of the herd where they should be. I tried to focus, but something was pulling my eyes back to looking at that spot time and time again. Eventually, I decided that I needed to get some fresh air and take a better look, satiate my curiosity, and then, with my mind at ease, I can get back to finishing my blog. The air is humid when I step outside. No breeze and the stars are out on full display. Thank goodness for no light pollution in the countryside. I leave the engine running and walk to the barrier my car is parked in front of. Leaning over and taking a pair of binoculars I bring for slower days when I want to see the deer in better detail. As I direct my vision to the eastern herd, I see something darting in the tree line. It's quick, hairy, and seemed to have moved the second my binoculars motioned towards it. Even a deer shouldn't be that spooked, especially from this distance. My joints seize up, and I damn near drop the binoculars when I hear a family snorting from behind me. I turn, and I see Jojo, standing 15 feet from me, just by the rear of my car, and his eyes gleaming in my rear lights. His head is low, and his antlers are thick, sharp, and aimed at me. In that moment, I don't know if he's going to charge and whether I should be fighting for my damn life. Instead, I do as I was instructed and stay still, not making sudden movements as he snorts again, closing the gap between us slowly. As he gets within 5 feet of me, he rears his head up. I see the most baffling expression on his face for a fleeting moment. Fear. Something ripples through the eastern forest and birds begin flying away in droves. Some of the deer heard in the western area are circling something, and Jojo immediately bounds down and out of sight to control the chaos. I waste no time getting in my car and driving down after them, keeping the doors locked, the window open a crack, and my speed at a decent crawl. As I come along the embankment that connects to the road, I see Jojo running full sprint towards another deer. He knocks the rival over and contorts the body as it skids across the gas and falls into the trail just ahead of my car. I know I'm not supposed to, but I stop the car and wait. In a choice between breaking the rules and breaking my car, I'll choose the former any day. The western herd deer under Jojo's command are gathering behind him, making horrific shrieks of terror. Jojo strides up and bows his head again in front of the still contorted deer, antlers on full display and dripping with black blood. It was a clear threat. Do not come back here if you value your life. I started wondering how I'd safely get this deer out of the way, or if I could mount the grass on the other side and go around it, when I saw something horrific unfold in front of me. The body twisted itself around, and the limbs snapped to reset themselves, the head still cracked at an ugly angle, bones sticking out of the sides as it got onto shaking legs. When it screamed, it sounded as if its lungs were filled with blood, a horrible, muted cry of anguish that backed up every deer but Jojo. I don't know what was keeping this thing standing, but it let its head flop lazily around as if it carefully backed away onto the eastern side of the reserve before bounding into the tree line as if nothing were wrong. My rational mind chalked it up to adrenaline and the instinct to survive, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I carried on driving as soon as the deer was out of the sight, not looking at Jojo or the others as I carried on down the trail. For the remaining few minutes, I felt unseen eyes staring intently at me until I crossed the threshold and back into civilization. I'd never been more grateful to see other humans, or my bed. Something about the whole incident just took it out of me. As I slept that night, I dreamed I was a deer alongside Jojo, frolicking in the herd and grazing peacefully. But as I cast my eyes upwards to the sky, a bitter chill in the wind, I saw the moon bathed in an almost purple plume, a strange light cast onto the land, and noises rustling from the woods opposite. I don't know how I knew this, but something in me indistinctly knew we weren't supposed to go there. I saw shapes begin to emerge from the trees, and that same horrible shriek rang out as I woke up in a sweat. I leaned forward to catch my breath and grab a glass of water. As I changed positions to reach for my nightstand, I swear I heard the sounds of something running up the trail to my house. I was probably still half asleep, but that didn't make it any more damn unnerving. I decided it would be best to drive out the next night and confront my concerns head on. If I'm not going to sleep soundly, then I should use my time wisely and document what I'm seeing. Maybe pass it to the rangers in the morning, right? When I drove back out there last night, the atmosphere was vastly different. A mist was enshrouding the trail, and the majority of the deer on the western side huddled together, shaking and staring intently at the other side of the nature reserve. I couldn't see Jojo anywhere. Strange, I thought. Alpha males patrol their herds dutifully. Why wasn't he there? I parked up at my usual spot, and making sure he wasn't around, I pulled out my binoculars again and stared at the eastern area. The clouds were beginning to part as the moon shone through. There were movement all along the tree line as shapes began emerging one by one. I think it took my mind a moment to process what I was seeing. I'd finally seen the deer on the eastern side, but they were wrong. Very, very wrong. Standing on their hind legs and taking confident, awkward steps, they marched out of trees with their heads craned to the sky, all of them emitting that horrible sound like their heads were being held underwater as they screamed. It reverberated in my ears and made my skin break out in goosebumps. There were dozens of them, maybe a couple of hundred. Some were dragging a structure out with them, others holding a writhing shape I couldn't quite see. They congregated in a small huddle, the center of which was obscured from my vision. I looked over to Jojo's herd and saw the fear in their eyes, so many of them shaking and their teeth bared, a primal fear we humans have largely lost in the safety of being in the dominant species. But this night showed me we're not as powerful as we think we are. As the huddle broke away and began walking again towards the edge of their field, I saw what they'd been huddled around. Jojo. He was still alive, but barely moving and breathing heavily, his eyes glazed over. When he began to come to, he started shrieking like a fawn. It was unnerving. They dragged him to the structure, a primitive set of steps with a hollowed-out hole in its center, coated in a thick substance on the sides, just large enough for Jojo to be thrown into. I watched these things, these not deer, use their front hooves to hoist him up and into the hole, his screaming incessant the entire time. They stood around him, their necks cracked as they stared at the moon and shrieked. I looked up with them, wondering if what they saw up there was in the skies, a kind of primitive god for these creatures. I should have known better, of course. Whatever god these deers prayed to, it didn't reside up above. No, it lurked deep below. A low groan called out in response. It possessed the same blood-filled lungs these monstrosities had, and Jojo's deer huddled closer together as its roar. Jojo had stopped moving, his crying completely gone, as the not deer, too, fell silent, and formed a circle around their altar, snorting in unison. It grew to a fever pitch before something began dragging Jojo from beneath, ripping at his limbs and pulling until a horrific squelch indicated the top had separated from the bottom. The whole spurted out blood and chunks of deer as the not deer celebrated, danced in the rain, and feasted on the pieces. One final roar rang out from the unseen creature. It shook the ground, and I felt my balance waver for just a moment, steadying myself on the car. I know I should have booked it out of there, but I was so desperate to understand what I was seeing, rationalizing that perhaps this was a bizarre art piece, maybe a protest from an animal rights group, or even a bunch of edgy satanic teens. But that rational voice in my head grew very, very quiet when I grabbed my binoculars to look again. Every single one of them was staring up at me, emotionless, black eyes fixated on my position. I did not wait any longer. I drove out of there at the breakneck pace, not looking at either side of the park on my exit, and damn near coming off the road with a lack of traction. As I got to the archway, my tire smashing against the grate, I'd inadvertently attracted the forest ranger on duty. He pulled me over and walked up to my window, a friendly smile on his face. "You know there's a speed limit there for a reason, right, son?" Yeah, I'm sorry. I got a little spooked is all," I smiled back. Nerve shot to hell. He raised an eyebrow. "You didn't break one of our rules now, did you?" "Oh no, I kept to him. It's just, Jojo got attacked by the eastern deer. I don't think he's doing well. It was just a shock to take in." I figured telling a half-truth would be best. Couldn't exactly say what I thought I'd really seen. Like, could I? They make their choices carefully. We don't know much, but we do not know to interfere. This is how it's always been. Animals have strange practices. You get how it is. So as long as they didn't look at you, you're fine. Deer remember faces after all. Thanks for visiting. Drive safe." He smiled again and tipped his hat before walking off to the station. My blood ran cold, and I couldn't get those words out of my head on the entire drive home. So as long as they don't look at you, you're fine. I've not stepped outside my house since last night. I live in a remote part of the village, and while I'll enjoy the privacy, it's been a hotbed for strange noises and unsettling emotions. Everywhere I go in my home, I feel like I'm being watched by those same vacant eyes. What happens now? What happens to those they look at? I can't get their eyes out of my head, and I can't sleep with a damn either. This isn't going to end until I figure out what they want. I wish I had more for you. I wish I could tell you what the deer were, what they prayed to, why they sacrificed, what the ranger knew. But there's so many unknowables that it makes my head spin. It's just like being deep in the woods. So many twists and turns. You never know which is the right path to take, and what danger lurks behind every tree. I don't know what the deer are doing. I don't know what is going on at that park. But if you value your life, you'll stay far, far away from it.